Jewish Education in Media is pleased to present L'Chaim, a program that highlights the people, issues, and events of importance to the Jewish community. Now here is your host, Rabbi Mark Golub.
I'm Mark Golub, and when I was a young man growing up in Connecticut, one of my political heroes was Abe Ribicoff, the first and only Jewish governor of the state of Connecticut, who became a friend and confidant of then Senator John F. Kennedy, served as Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare in the Kennedy administration, and went on to serve with distinction as one of Connecticut's United States Senators from 1963 to 1981. Abe Ribicoff was also the first Jew to be offered the slot of vice president by George McGovern twice. Each time, Ribicoff declined the offer. Of course, Abe Ribicoff was especially important to me because he was Jewish, a proud, public Jew. What I didn't know was that in his Senate office, there was another young and upcoming Jewish boy from Stamford, Connecticut, working as an intern. This young man would go on to serve 3 terms in the Connecticut Senate as Majority Leader. He would then serve as Connecticut's State Attorney General. And in 1988, he became a United States Senator from Connecticut, a position he would win another 3 times, serving a total of 24 years in the upper chamber of Congress to become one of the most highly respected statesmen of our generation. And if that weren't enough, this senator was a profoundly committed Jew, part of the modern Orthodox community, and one of the staunchest supporters of the State of Israel the Senate has ever known. And in the presidential election of 2000, he was chosen to be the first Jewish candidate for the office of Vice President of the United States as Al Gore's running mate. There's no way to overestimate the significance of his contribution to Jewish life. It's a reflection of his competence and character, his professionalism, and his stature as a national statesman. So talk about heroes. He has been for years and years one of my political heroes. And what an enormous honor it is to be able to welcome to L'Chaim former United States Senator Joe Lieberman, who continues to occupy an important role as a voice of reason and sanity and moderation and support for the State of Israel. Joe Lieberman currently serves as senior counsel at the law firm of Kasowitz, Benson, Torres, and Friedman in New York City, which represents clients on a wide range of public policy, strategic and regulatory issues, as well as homeland and national security, defense, health, energy, environmental policy, and intellectual property matters. And on a personal note, because I'm a rabbi in Joe Lieberman's hometown of Stamford, Connecticut, I've had the pleasure of being with Joe off and on for these past decades. And without meaning to embarrass him, you should know that Joe Lieberman is one of the loveliest human beings you could ever know, and has none of the pomposity or air of self-importance that is so typical of our elected representatives, who tend to take themselves so seriously. Senator Joe Lieberman has been able to build a career in public service that has elevated him to the highest levels of stature while remaining a mensch. And it is beyond an honor.
Wow.
It is beyond an honor to have you finally sitting at this table. I adore you. Thank you for being here.
Really, that was about the best introduction I've ever received. I appreciate it. I take it seriously and sincerely, and it means a lot to me.
Well,
it was
thank
really a trip down memory lane.
Was it?
Yes, it was, because beginning with Abe Ribikoff, who was for me also a hero,
Yes.
and then I was fortunate enough to have him become a mentor when I started my career in public service. And we can talk about it as this discussion goes on, Mark, but I think about him a lot now because, well, when he first got elected governor of Connecticut, and this I had to go back and research. I just knew I was excited, and my family was, because Connecticut had a Jewish governor of all things, that he faced a Republican legislature. And his first, I think it was his first, State of the State address, he titled "The Integrity of Compromise." And he said to the Republican legislature, you know, if we're here to get something done for our state, and to do that, we've got to talk to each other, and we've got to compromise. And there's nothing unethical about compromise, so long as we do it right. And of course, I've been thinking about that because in Washington, they seem to have lost the ability to compromise, and therefore nothing's getting done. Anyway, thank you. Those I treasure those words.
Thank you very,
and,
very much. You're a sweetheart.
Return the respect and admiration for what you've built here, which you have built, and it matters a lot to a lot of people who watch you.
Thank you very much, Joe. So before we talk politics or issues,
yes,
I want to frame a little bit about how you end up a Jewish kid in politics. All right? So first of all, for one moment, talk about your mother and father and your home growing up as a Jew.
Yeah.
A Jewish kid. What was that like? What was your Jewish home like?
Right. So, I always say I was born lucky. We're all lucky to be born. I was also born lucky because I had great parents.
Who were they?
Marcia and Henry Lieberman. My mom's family had come to Stanford from basically the Carpathian Mountains. It was then Romania, later around a place called Bukovina, that province, and today is Ukraine. She was born in the U.S. My dad's mother came from what's today Belarus. His father came from Poland. They met here in New York, actually. And sadly, my grandmother, my father's mother, died in the flu epidemic of 1918, 101 years ago. So he was 3, so he had hardly any memories, and of course I never knew her. They were great people. My dad's father remarried, moved to New Haven. He moved to New Haven. And then he got out of high school there in the Depression. Couldn't go to college, no thought of it. Bright man, wonderfully intelligent man. Worked his way sort of looking for jobs. Ended up working in Stanford at the old Yale in town, which was a lock factory, and was eventually did a lot of work in the Second World War. And met my mom at a Purim party at the Stanford Jewish Center.
How lovely.
He said that he was somehow, as I remember my dad, they're both gone now, my dad describing this, he was sort of on a balcony and looked down, and this woman came in, the young woman came in the room, and everybody clustered around her. And he said, I got to meet her. And that was my mom. Anyway, I couldn't have asked for more supportive, honorable, motivating parents. And honestly, they were the root. It was a modern Orthodox family.
Yes.
I sometimes joke today. I said, then we were one of the most Orthodox families in Stanford. Today, we'd probably be considered traditional conservative. You know, the center of the Orthodox community has moved. But it was an open orthodoxy. My rabbi, Joe Lieberman, from a congregation of Good Shalom, all about outreach. I mean, I'll never forget one summer during college, first year Abe Ribikoff was in Washington. I had an internship in his office, and that August, 1963, was Dr. Martin Luther King's March on Washington. So, of course, I went to march. It was right there. And who do I run into but my rabbi, Joe Lieberman, there with an interfaith biracial delegation from Stamford, Connecticut. So it gives you an idea of the group.
He also was passed, but he did marvelous work in terms of interfaith work.
He did.
And interracial work, and he's missed very, very much.
Yeah, he was very special. So that was the time. I mean, my dad owned a liquor store for 40 years. He worked very hard to send my.
Everybody knew your father, you know.
Yeah.
Everybody knew you, and everybody knew your father.
Yeah.
He was, you know, he had a sterling reputation. By the way,
you.
the sort of quiet strength that you have. No one questions your strength, but you're not bellicose. Your quiet strength. Was that him?
That was my dad. My dad was not he was very smart, he was very confident, but he was not a shouter, not a screamer. Mm-hmm. And you know, now looking back at now as a parent, grandparent, yes. I always say to people, parents have actually as much or more effect on their children by the way they behave as they do by what they say to their kids. You could say, do this, do that, but the kids watch you, and there's no question that my father was a role model for me, just as my mother was in another sense. She was very warm, very personable. She was something.
You were lucky.
I was really lucky. They were, I mean, this is a bit of a caricature. I was thinking about it because I went to a college reunion a while ago. There was a fellow there from Utah who became a good friend of mine. I was at Yale. So he came home with me one weekend. And he was a Mormon. It was sort of fascinating. We went through Shabbat and all that. Anyway, we're on the train going back to New Haven on Sunday. He said, boy, your parents are so proud of you and supportive of you, Joe. I have this vision of your childhood that when you came down for breakfast in the morning, your mom and dad gave you a standing ovation. I said, Ed, it wasn't quite like that, but I get the point.
It was very sweet. You have siblings?
2 sisters. I'm the oldest of the 3. Wonderful, and we remain close today. The second in age is in, of all places, Norman, Oklahoma, where her husband worked at the University of Oklahoma, and he's now retired. And she's a psychiatric social worker. And my other sister, Ellen, lives in Bridgeport. She's run Free Shakespeare in Bridgeport Theater Company. So they both went to college and graduate school, and it was, my father wouldn't let us apply for scholarships. He wanted, I mean, there were points at which we probably could have qualified because he ran a liquor store, but he wanted to send us to college and graduate school, and he did.
And it was a point of pride for him.
Point of pride, right? Because he didn't have the chance himself.
So you said at the time it was it really was mainstream Orthodox that you were growing up in, and then the Orthodox community has moved, and so the next thing you know, you're sort of modern Orthodox.
Yeah.
But you had Shabbat in your home on Friday night, right? Was it Shomer Shabbat? Did your parents work?
That's a very interesting question. The house was Shomer Shabbat. My dad, for most of my childhood, opened the store on Shabbat.
That was the model.
That was the model. He felt, and he was probably right. He had no choice.
Yes.
In a way, he couldn't afford to have somebody else come in.
And there were blue laws in Stamford at that point, weren't there?
He couldn't be open on Sunday.
Exactly.
Yeah. So my dad did something that, when I think back to it, and he didn't just do it on Shabbat. It's so unusual, but it was acceptable then. He closed the store at lunch hour. It was only him in there. Now, on a Monday to Friday, he would make deliveries and then come home and have a quick lunch with my mother. So we did get to see him on a lot of lunches on Shabbat, but he worked on Saturday.
And kashrut was in your home, obviously.
Yeah, very much so.
Where did you go to school?
So I went to the public schools. The aforementioned Rabbi Joe Ehrenkrantz, when I was in 8th grade, tried to convince me and my parents that they should send me to a yeshiva high school in New York, and I should think about becoming a rabbi. There was one of those crossroad decisions. But the truth is, I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to leave home, and I didn't really want to be a rabbi, and my folks didn't want me to leave home either. So that was a good turning point.
All right. So that's the obvious next question. At what point does Joe Lieberman begin to even consider the world of politics? At what time, at what point and why do you become politically aware
Right.
and think to yourself, you know, I'd like to move in that direction?
Yeah. So it started in ways that were far from politics. I've thought about this. So I ran for president of my 9th grade class at the junior high school, and then the senior class at Stanford. I said, is that politics? In a way. But really the origin of it came from, I think, 3 things. One was my religious education and the whole idea of tikkun olam. We're here, it's a gift that we're alive, and we have a responsibility to try to make the world better.
I want to interrupt you for 1 second. You said there are 3 things.
Yeah.
We're doing the first one first.
Okay, tikkun olam.
Okay. I want you to remember, because I want to hear from you. When I was growing up, no one spoke of tikkun olam. No one. There were all kinds of expressions that meant the very same thing that people now use.
Right.
But I want to know, when you say tikkun olam or tikkun olam, are you now reading back in time and using a term from today
question.
back? But had you and I been friends at that point, would we have been talking about tikkun olam?
So the true answer is I don't remember.
Fair enough.
But you're probably right. But I was influenced, by the idea that we had a obligation to be of service.
Yes.
That's the right word.
Yes.
And I got that from my parents, and I got it from my rabbi, particularly. So that's part of it. The second part, quite different, is when I was in high school, I started to read history and biography. I was fascinated by it, and it had an effect on me. I mean, to make a long story short, I had a sense of the impact that leaders have, for good and bad, or have had in history. Of course, I was taken first by the great American leaders like Washington and Lincoln. Probably I didn't read too much until college about Teddy Roosevelt, but he became a hero. And then Truman was fascinating to me. I mean, not without a classic education and yet very educated, a real decider, as a later president said. I mean, he had the ability to make difficult decisions, and really most of them turned out right. And obviously, I was at a point where I was beginning to read and understand about Hitler and the Holocaust. So there was the ultimate evil in a leader. And then my generation was fortunate because we had John F. Kennedy. Mm-hmm. And this was young, brilliant, the whole...
Wasn't it magic, Joe?
It was magic. And I can still, those lines in the Kennedy inaugural still move me. Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. So, and that related quite neatly back to the lessons of service that I got.
Yes, it inspired you, didn't it?
It did.
In a Jewish context, it inspired you.
Yeah. Here's a line I always remember toward the very end, maybe the last sentence of that inaugural address of John F. Kennedy. He said, "We ask God's blessings on our work, but we know that here on earth, God's work must truly be our own." So that also tied back to what I... Very Jewish. Right. And there was something else which was operating at a unarticulated or perhaps even subconscious level, which is, Kennedy was a member of another religious minority group, Roman Catholics. A lot more Roman Catholics than Jews, but nonetheless, never had a Roman Catholic president before. And the fact that he got elected somehow said to me that doors were opening up for me. Trust me, I wasn't thinking yet of being a U.S. Senator, certainly not of being president, but it just felt like something good had happened through him. And I think that's true.
Yes. Kennedy had an enormous impact on me.
Yeah.
And his death had an enormous impact on me. Where were you when you learned he had been assassinated?
So, we all remember that, right? I was lucky enough to be, this was 1963, I was the editor of the Yale newspaper. And I was at the newspaper building. And somebody called me, one of the other students, and said, the president has been shot. I said, what? And there was one television down on the first floor of the building with rabbit ears and all that stuff. And I went down, and there was Walter Cronkite, and I watched those. It was terrible. And I remember I did something, I don't know if I ever talked about it. I went up to I had a little office as editor of the news. I closed the door, and I just started to pray that that his life be saved. And of course it wasn't. It was very, very hard. So you kind of throw yourself into what you're doing. We all put out a special edition of the Yale Daily News that night, paying tribute to him, reporting on it, but it had a big effect.
I was at Columbia.
Yeah.
I wept for days.
Yeah.
It was, I don't think anybody who didn't live through it can understand what it was.
Correct.
And, and now there's so much revisionist history in America. And things come out about people who had iconic positions
Right.
in our lives. And there's this, Kennedy's sex and Martin Luther
Right.
King's sex.
Right.
And I say to myself, for me, none of that tarnishes what he represented and what he stood for and what he did. Has it tarnished it at all for you?
Not really, but I must say, in the end, not really, because his public service, beginning with his words, very articulate, and his actions, and the sort of combination of positions, very progressive on domestic policy, strong on foreign policy. Of course, we were in the middle of the Cold War then, big advocate of human rights. All meant a lot to me. I've asked myself, Mark, sometimes, because there's no lines of privacy anymore for public officials. Would Kennedy have been the catalyzing hero that he was in my life if I had known everything about his private life? I hope so. Mm-hmm. But it's harder for young people to have heroes today because everybody has shortcomings, and sooner or later it all becomes public. So I guess I'd say those three things put me on the path. And working for Abe Rubakoff in the Senate,
the deal?
it sealed the deal, so that by the time I graduated from law school, if you had asked me, what's your dream, Lieberman? So I wouldn't have actually answered it because it was too presumptuous. I would have said, my dream is to be a United States Senator. That was undoubtedly affected by Abe Rubakoff.
I am thrilled for you.
Yeah, so I lived my dream.
You did.
I mean, well, thank God, thank the people of Connecticut,
Okay.
So.
And what about the fact that you were an Orthodox Jew? Kennedy was a Roman Catholic.
Right.
But for him, the Catholicism he lived with Jackie was not the same kind of Judaism you lived with your family.
Yeah.
There were burdens on you that were not on him. And there was that classic moment, I believe in Texas, but I'm not sure, where he basically said that his allegiance was not to the papacy, it was to the United States of America. Okay. And that sort of ended that whole Catholic issue. And the next thing you know, we have a Catholic president, which we now take totally for granted.
Right.
But you're a Jew. And not only you're a Jew, you're a committed Jew. You're an observant Jew. You've written about this, but I do want to hear you talk to me for one moment. How were you able to balance being a committed, observant Jew? There are many Jews who are committed. I love them all. If you were not observant, it would not mean you were less of a Jew to me.
I agree.
But you chose to be an observant Jew,
right,
a halachic Jew,
right,
and you are a United States Senator. Work goes on in the Senate on Shabbat. You're a senator, but you're a Shomer Shabbat. I want to know two things. You must have had a way of working this out on a conscious level. And then I want to know whether you ever faced any kind of difficulty, even anti-Semitism, from within that body, that august body of the Senate, because you made those choices.
right. When I started out, I'll just tell you this story. as a state senator, as you said earlier, I had left full observance during college and law school, came back to it afterward. But anyway, by the time I was elected to the state senate, I was observing Shabbat again and the holidays. And it was awkward at first in this sense. There'd be a testimonial dinner for somebody who had helped me get elected on Friday night. And you can't come? Why? So people were puzzled, sometimes angry, or a sheriff's outing on Saturday afternoon. From the beginning, I tried to make a separation between political events, which I wouldn't do on the Sabbath, and governmental responsibilities, which I couldn't give to anybody else, that I really felt I had a responsibility to do. And I also felt that decision was sustained by Jewish law over the centuries.
It's a form of pikuach nefesh.
I'd like to think so. I never got a rabbi to specifically say that, but indirectly they did.
Well, I'm not the rabbi you'd go to, but a rabbi has now said it for you.
Good, thank you. But let me flash forward to the Senate, because you talked about that. I will say that in Connecticut, where the Jewish population was probably 2 or 3%, when I first ran for the Senate, which was the time it was most evident to the public that I was an observant Jew. Why? Because the convention nominating me was on a Saturday. I couldn't go, so I accepted her in a pre-recorded announcement. That was all over the newspapers. I actually ended up feeling that not only did it not hurt me politically, but somehow it was a point of contact with people who were religious. Connecticut, at that point, maybe still, I'm not sure, had one of the highest percentages of Roman Catholics. I'll tell you a quick story. I ran an uphill race for the Senate the first time against the incumbent Republican senator, who was a force, Lowell Weicker. And most people didn't think I had a chance. I got a call from a colleague of mine from the state Senate, a friend, Con O'Leary, and he said, you know, I think you're going to win. This is about 10 days before the election. I think you're going to win the election. I said, I'm thrilled to hear, because not many people besides me and you think that. Why? So he told me he went to visit his mother, Mrs. O'Leary, and he talked to her about the presidential election, which was Bush 41 against Dukakis. O'Leary's a Democrat. Couldn't convince her she should vote for Dukakis. What about the Senate with Lieberman and Weicker? Oh, no problem, I'm voting for Lieberman. Why? Why is that no problem? Because I like the fact that he takes his religion seriously, that he doesn't do politics on a Sabbath. So, you know, who's to say? I only won that election by 1% of the vote, so maybe that was the difference. But in the Senate, I found actually the same thing, which was that I made a decision that I would not, if humanly possible, miss a vote because of my observance of the Sabbath. And so sometimes I would have to either stay at the Capitol on a Friday night or walk the distance, which was not close, it was 4 miles plus, to where we lived, Friday night or Saturday morning. But people really respected that and accepted it, and I never had a problem with it.
Good for you.
Yeah,
Good
thank
for
you. And I cast some really important votes that turned out to be on Saturday.
And you had to be there.
I had to be there because, of course, I can't delegate my vote. Pikuach nefesh, right.
So then, lo and behold, you're tapped to be Al Gore's running mate. And now you are the first Jew to become a candidate. And, Joe, you came this close to being vice president.
Right. Some people think we won.
And you did win the popular vote.
Yeah.
If I was a member of your family, you know, and you're there with Hadassah and your kids, and I'm there too, and you just get the word, you're going to be the first Jewish vice president, Joe Lieberman, right?
Right.
Henry's son.
Yeah.
Masha?
Marcia, right. Henry was gone. Marcia was alive.
What was it like for you?
Oh, it was phenomenal.
What was it? No, I want to know. What was it like for you when you understand you are the first Jew in the United States of America who's going to be running on a presidential ticket?
Yeah. You know, it's fascinating because I talked to Abe Ribicoff about why he turned down George McGovern
Yes.
years ago. And, you know, he said he was honored that McGovern had asked him to run for vice president. Of course, he had a sense, McGovern was really swimming upstream against Nixon that year. And Abe was worried that McGovern's loss would be blamed on him as the first Jew on a ticket. By the time we got to 2000, I never had that feeling. Part of it was I think our society was much more open. We'd been through the fullest, the civil rights revolution, women's rights. Also, Gore was, after all, the vice president, so I had a feeling of confidence about that. I was vetted, as they say, and he interviewed me. We went into the last weekend. It was the first weekend in August. It was pretty clear from what was being leaked out and on the TV that the finalists, interestingly, were John Kerry, John Edwards, and me, and that it was going to be announced Sunday night. So my mom came up from Stanford to New Haven, where we lived at the time. Family was all together, and I got a call from my press secretary. He said he had gotten a call from somebody at one of the networks. This will caution you to believe everything you hear from the networks. It wasn't a cable network, it was a big network. And they had heard from somebody inside the meeting with Vice President Gore that he had chosen John Edwards.
Oh, there you go. It's
So
a done deal. It's a done deal.
We took out a bottle of wine, we made a toast. You know, what a country we live in that I came that close.
Right.
We go to sleep, get up in the morning, I turn on the television in New Haven, and believe it or not, it's like 5:07. And the local anchor on Channel 8, New Haven TV, says, now let me repeat that exciting news. The Associated Press is reporting that Vice President Gore has chosen our own Senator Joe Lieberman as his running mate. And actually, when I say it now, I get a kind of, you know, chill. And I had it then, and I woke up my wife. Everything was exciting, and the phone started to ring, and pandemonium, and my mother was sleeping in the bedroom next door. And we told her. It was a really exciting time.
I am so happy for you.
Yeah, it was really thrilling. I just finished this story by telling you that they flew a team, the team that Vice President Gore's campaign had chosen to run my vice presidential campaign to New Haven to fly us to Nashville that day, where the announcement will be made the next morning. I just share this with you, and we had a lovely dinner with the Gores, and my family and his. And he said to me, I want you to know that I decided 2 weeks ago that you were my first choice, but I thought it would be irresponsible if I didn't talk to some people confidentially who I trusted about whether America was ready for a Jewish person, the proverbial heartbeat away from the presidency. And he said the reactions I got were fascinating. I talked to some of my closest Jewish friends, and there was actually, to me, Al Gore said, surprising anxiety among them, and a couple said, please don't do it. Among the Christians I talked to, everybody said, it's not a problem, Al, go for it. So he had a good sense of humor, still does. He said, so since I know that there are millions more Christians in America than Jews, I was able to make the choice. Now, what that says, of course, the Jewish reaction is based on Jewish history. And the Christian reaction really says America's a different country than you Jews. They were saying it to Al, but then Jews have lived in. And they were right, because really my religion was no factor in the campaign. And I don't want to relitigate the results of the election, but the fact is, you know, politics is like sports, it comes down to numbers. Gore and I got 544,000 more votes than George Bush and Dick Cheney. So it says that the only time there was a Jewish person on one of the top two, 500,000 plus more people voted for the ticket, which is really a wonderful comment about America and vindicates Al Gore's confidence, because really he made the decision.
And it also says something extraordinary about America, doesn't it?
Oh, it does.
I have the feeling that American Jews today are worried about the character
Right.
of America because there's anti-Semitism.
Right.
And I have to let you know, I argue on JBS all the time that while there is anti-Semitism, there's always been anti-Semitism, but that the anti-Semitism is in no way institutional, and it does not represent the people of the United States. And while we should always be vigilant, and we should know our history, there is a dramatic difference between the United States of America and virtually every place the Jew has been throughout the diaspora. And yet Jews today, Joe, are now suddenly very nervous
Right.
about being American Jews, and they write me all the time, oh, should we thank God for Israel, we can go there, and thank God for Israel, but not
Sure.
in my mind, because it's time for Jews to start packing. Could you speak to how you look at that phenomenon in contemporary American Jewish life?
So first, thank you for what you've said. I totally agree with you, and I give a similar answer, almost to the word, to what you've just said. And I relate it to my experience in 2000. I faced no anti-Semitism. Now, I always say to people, does that mean I think there were no anti-Semites in America? Of course not. But there was a prevailing ethic that made it unacceptable for the anti-Semites to speak out, and they were a minority. I'm convinced, just as you said, Mark, that they remain a minority. Some things have changed, particularly social media, that make it possible for these people who, not so long ago, sort of operated invisibly under a rock to suddenly, bring a computer under the rock, and they're broadcasting on social media, and it makes it seem larger than it is. As you said, never take it for granted, fight it when it appears. The two violent acts we've had at synagogues in Pittsburgh and San Diego obviously are heartbreaking and infuriating, but the American people are not anti-Semitic. They're, if anything, pro-Semitic. And we've never, honestly, I always say to audiences I get the opportunity to talk to that we may be the most fortunate, blessed generation of Jews ever because of the reestablishment of the State of Israel and the fact that America exists.
Oh, you say beautifully.
Which has given us more freedom, opportunity, respect, etc., than any country we've lived in outside of Israel.
One very quick question, I want a quick answer.
Yeah.
So then, after you and Gore are defeated,
Right.
you ultimately leave the Democratic Party. Why?
Well, I mean, honestly, I got pushed out of the party. Really.
Why, though?
Okay, so this was all about the Iraq War, and I don't think I'm being...
because you supported the Iraq War?
Yeah, I supported the Iraq War, but almost everybody, I mean, more than half of the Democrats in the Senate supported the Iraq War of 2000.
Well, they all voted for it turns out.
Yeah.
And then they did an about-face
Yeah.
later.
So I felt that it was important to get rid of Saddam Hussein. There was no question we messed up after that. We didn't plan how to rebuild the country, but there was a rush for the door, and I felt that is to get us out of there.
Okay.
And I felt it would have been a mistake to get out because it would have affected, in defeat, I think it would have affected America's credibility in the world and the security of the world. So I stuck with it, and people in the Democratic Party were so anti-Bush and anti-war that they linked me with Bush, and that was enough for me to lose the primary for re-election in 2006.
Now, you were considered for another spot as the vice president with John McCain. Is that true?
That is true, much to my amazement.
Okay. And if he had asked you, would you have run with him?
I would have.
Okay. And the reason I bring this up is we live in an age, Joe, where there is no dialogue.
Right.
It's not even, compromise is not in the rearview mirror, because without dialogue you can't get to compromise.
Correct.
And again, I only want a moment from you, but you're a pro here. You live this. As you look at it, in addition to it being, if it is, heartbreaking for you intellectually and emotionally, how do you explain it to yourself, the enormous divide that even preceded Donald Trump? It's
Right.
gotten worse since
No, I
Donald
agree.
Trump.
It preceded
But it
Trump.
preceded Donald Trump.
Right.
This inability for, and in some way it reflects what happened to you in Congress when in the Senate your own party said, if you don't toe the line
Right.
on an issue,
Right.
you're gone.
Even though my voting record was pretty overwhelmingly Democratic.
Of course, no, it was.
Right, right. So but people look back and say to me, and I didn't think of it myself, that 2006 campaign in some ways was a harbinger of what was coming, like the canary in the coal mine. There are a lot of reasons for it, Mark. I think the gerrymandering of districts, so people are more worried about getting renominated than reelected.
But wasn't that always true?
It's been more since reapportionment cases. The media have become very partisan. Wasn't like that when I first got into it. And the elected officials play to that. The excess of money in politics creates dependency and a lack of courage. So to really dialogue and compromise, you have to have the courage then to do something to deal with a big problem that maybe makes some voters unhappy. But that's the only way problems get solved and progress occurs. And we got to get back to that because the country really is suffering. That's why McCain thought about me. Frankly, when he asked me if he could vet me, as they say, once again to be investigated, all the rest, tax returns, background, I said, John, I don't know how you can do it. You know, I got elected as an independent, but I'm still a registered Democrat. That's the point, you know, classic McCain. That's the point. The country, we need to show the country that we're going to form a bipartisan team. And so quickly, you use the keyword dialogue. How did I become such a great friend with McCain? I think it was because we spent a lot of time on planes together, visiting troops in Iraq, Afghanistan, traveling parts of the world, and you talk. What do you read? And it's not only about politics. What are you reading? He was a voracious reader, and you talk about it. So from the dialogue, you develop a kind of friendship, and then trust, and then you're willing to work together.
And that doesn't happen now?
It's not happening.
Isn't that a shame?
Terrible. And you know, to me, the number one victim of that is the country, but the second victim are the members of Congress. Because truthfully, and I keep in touch with a lot of them in both parties, they're not enjoying it. They want to get something done, and yet they act in a way that stops them from getting something done.
So one of the things that's very upsetting now to American Jews who grew up as Democrats, we all, you know, it's cliche, 70% of the American Jewish community tends to vote Democratic, and I'm growing up in the 40s and the 50s, a typical liberal American Jew,
Right.
and my parents are strong Democrats. And then a number of years ago, I see at a Democratic National Convention, they're discussing a platform, and they want to put Jerusalem back in the platform, and on the floor, they're booing.
They're booing, right.
Okay. And then it moves on, and we have 3 freshman congresswomen elected, all of whom support BDS, the Boycott, Divestment, Sanctions movement against Israel. And 2 of them are Muslim, and it may be that they honestly don't understand what anti-Semitism is, but they're certainly saying things that are definitely anti-Zionist, anti-Israel, and they reflect a certain kind of anti-Semitic essence inside them that are very upsetting. And it's one thing for these young people who may not know better, but what we don't see in the Democratic Party is the grown-ups. We don't see the Nancy Pelosi's. We don't see the Chuck Schumers. We don't see the Dick Blumenthal's, who's now a colleague from Connecticut. We don't see Dianne Feinstein. We don't see, and not just Jews, we don't see the presidential candidates, hopefuls in the Democratic Party, saying, when somebody says, you know, I take comfort in the fact that the Palestinian people, while they were ruined by the Jewish immigration to Palestine, at least I take comfort in the fact that I know my Palestinian people helped save the Jews. Now that is factually a 180-degree wrong
Correct.
statement.
Correct.
And nobody says to her,
Right.
excuse me, Congresswoman Tlaib, it's not true.
Right.
You know, the Grand Mufti was meeting with Hitler. They would have implemented a
Exactly.
final solution if they had won World War II. The Palestinian people did not facilitate Jewish immigration, saving Jews. And people get upset about the statement that she's somewhat calmed by it. That's not the issue. She had the facts wrong.
Correct.
Okay. And nobody in our party said, hold on a minute, understand what you're saying is, and let's you don't have to say outrageous. It's inappropriate and it's factually wrong.
Actually, wrong and divisive.
Okay, so my question for you is, why is this happening? Why is the far left in the Democratic Party becoming more and more hostile to Israel? And what does that say to you as someone who yourself, leaving the fact aside that you were thrown out, you're a lifelong Democrat yourself.
Yeah, I'm still a registered Democrat.
Of course you are. Okay.
Right.
So what's it say to you, and what would you say to our audience, which cares passionately about Israel, cares passionately about America,
Right.
and is worried to heck now, Joe,
Yes.
that the Democratic Party is moving in the wrong direction?
So am I. In other words, there's been a real flip. Today, the Republican Party is what I would say reflexively pro-Israel, and the Democratic Party is more hesitant. Now, I will tell you that I'm comforted by the fact that, in my opinion, the overwhelming majority of Democrats in Congress are pro-Israel. But we've got something very different happening with the election of these three women who are, everything you said is right, Mark. They're factually off. They could have built bridges. Certainly the two Muslim women could have built bridges between their Muslim community and the Jewish community and the broader Christian community. Instead, they set up walls by what they said, and they're not informed. So, and then what was really worse, and I'm sure that in the Democratic caucus in the House, there was a feeling they're new, let's not be too tough on them. But really, it was a moral crisis. It was a political crisis. It was a moment when everybody in Congress and outside was challenged to say, this is wrong. This is not America. This is really anti-Semitic. It's not just anti-Israel. And they passed a resolution which was muffled. It was not strong. And that was very distasteful. So I think we who care about this, and fortunately it's not only Jews who care about it, have to really try to reach out to these three women, if they'll listen, these three members of Congress, and bring them to Israel. Let them see what the country is about. Let them meet the Israeli Arab community, which is not ecstatic, but pretty happy to be Israeli citizens overall. This is a big challenge for the pro-Israel community in America, and to not let the Democratic Party drift to a skeptical position on Israel. Part of the strength of American support for Israel has been that support has been bipartisan,
Yes.
and we can't lose it.
Yes. You haven't spoken, and maybe you can't, or maybe there's no answer. It's not for me what these young people are saying. What bothers me is the L.A. Engels don't say anything. The Pelosi's don't say anything. The presidential candidates don't say anything.
Well,
And unless they
yeah,
do,
I agree.
it's got to come
What
from
happens is, first of all, I know Elliot Engel said some things, but it wasn't much covered. That's what happens. The kind of controversy gets covered. The offensive statements get covered, not the responses. I know Nancy Pelosi well for a long time. I know she's very pro-Israel, but she got pushed back a bit by her caucus right at the beginning of her time as Speaker. It's not good. I mean,
Okay.
I heard Steny Hoyer, the number 2 Democrat in the House, speak to the AIPAC convention, so that he was speaking there, but he said, everybody has to understand that Democrats retook the majority in the House because we elected something like 62 new Democrats. And he said it again, 62, not 3. The reality is, because I was involved in a lot of those other campaigns, helping the center-left Democrats, that it's because of the center-left Democrats, not the left-wing Democrats, that Democrats took over the House, and they are very pro-Israel. And
then they've got to speak up.
They got to speak up,
They've
because
gotta.
otherwise the Democratic Party, in the mind of the general public, will be defined by Ocasio-Cortez, Omar, and Tlaib.
Correct.
And those center and center-left Democrats are not going to get reelected.
Are you glad the president recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel?
I'm thrilled. I mean, I was one of the co-sponsors of the legislation. It was finally adopted in 1995. That's a long time ago.
Yes.
To move the embassy of the United States
And your
from Tel Aviv
legislation was kicked down the road time and
over
time
and over again. And the argument for it was so strong that, Israel is the only country in the world where we don't put our embassy in the city the host country says is the capital, and Israel is obviously one of our closest allies. Why? President after president of both parties was convinced by, I guess, people in the State Department, there'll be riots in the Arab streets if we do this. And when President Trump, in all his unconventionality, said, wait a second, this doesn't make sense, we're moving the embassy to Jerusalem, there really was relative calm, except on the Gaza border, and Hamas orchestrated that.
And there would have been that anyway.
It would have been that anyway.
Okay, and what about the president pulling out of the Iran deal?
Well, I was very critical of the Iran deal.
I know.
Yeah, I think that the Iranians were challenged by China, were challenged by Russia. It's an unsettled world, but to me the most serious threat that the world has and that America has is from the extremists in Tehran. And that agreement just didn't do it. So I hope that the pressure that the Trump administration is putting on Iran economically will bring them back to negotiate, hopefully, a better agreement. We'll see.
Is it possible for a Jew to feel that Donald Trump does not represent the kind of person he wants to be the president of the United States, and still at the same time for that Jew to appreciate some of the good things that Donald Trump has done, whether it's for Israel or for America? Is it possible for both to exist?
Yeah, it's possible because you're looking at somebody who holds those two
Okay.
points of view. And it's a lot of people, as we head into 2020, depending on what happens, will have that same tension. They agree with some, maybe many, of the things President Trump has done, but they don't like the way he behaves. And they'll have to decide whether they want to vote for him.
I'm only disappointed that American Jews, that American Jewry, which I think is bright and sophisticated,
Right.
it's like they've lost their minds when it comes to Trump, and they hate him so much
Yeah.
that whatever he does, he gets no credit for. Rabbis have said, Joe, it was the right thing to move the capital to Jerusalem, but it was the wrong president to do it, therefore it was wrong. That's insane.
That makes no sense.
Does it, right?
No.
So I am hoping that American Jews listen to you. You can be very critical of Trump, as people have been critical of every
Right.
president, and not very few things in life, Joe, are black and white. Yes,
I agree. So you got to be grateful and say, yes, I agree, when President Trump does something you agree with. And if you don't like the way he behaves in other cases, you should say that too.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
Okay, so as you look at Jewish life today, here's where we're going to end.
Okay.
As you look at Jewish life today, not simply as somebody who has served in the Senate for 24 years, not simply who has been a national statesman who came this close to being president, and you had more of the popular vote anyway,
Right.
but also as a caring Jew who loves Israel. What is it that worries you most about American Jewish life today, and then what is it that gives you the most optimism about Jewish life today?
I'm generally optimistic. I mean, there's no question there's change within the American Jewish community. There's a lot of assimilation. Numbers are falling. And yet there's a lot of strength to the Jewish community, and there's a lot of strength to America. There's an ethic here in our rule of law and the openness of our society that tells me that, as far as I can see forward, this country will be a wonderful home for Jews. The other thing going on is that the center of the Jewish world has now moved to Israel, numerically, in addition to every other way. And there, that also should make American Jews optimistic, because Israel is strong, it's vibrant, it's diverse, it's economically dynamic, and in its own way, well, its relations with some parts of the world like Europe are fraying a bit. It has really improving relations with India, China, Africa, and some parts of Latin America. So it's a great time to be Jewish. And
you're still optimistic about Jewish life here in America, despite this fringe anti-Semitism.
Yeah, totally. I think the anti-Semitism here is fringe. We got to take it seriously. We have to push it back under the rocks from which it came. We have to ask more of the social media companies that allow this hatred toward Jews and toward blacks, et cetera, and extremism to be on the internet. But the overwhelming majority of the American people still see this as a great country, and part of it being great is that everybody is equal as an American. Great to be with you.
I
enjoyed it a lot.
I told you, I love you, and you're fabulous, and you are one of my heroes.
Thank
And
you.
I have a problem because we didn't get enough time, so you've got to somehow get back here again, and we'll talk more about other issues we didn't get to. Everybody's going to write me, but why didn't you ask him? Why didn't you ask him?
All right,
we'll do it
come
the
back.
next time. Fair enough?
Keep a list, and I'll come back.
Thank you so much.
Take care. Be well.
Joe Lieberman, formerly the distinguished senator from the state of Connecticut, currently senior counsel at the law firm of Kasowitz, Benson, Torres, and Friedman in New York. He's a lover of the United States of America, passionate supporter of the State of Israel, and he is a wonderful human being. It's been my privilege to present him here to you on L'Chaim. As always, I invite you to be in touch with me with any thoughts or comments you may have to any of the ideas expressed on this edition of L'Chaim. Please email me, write me, post on our Facebook page, or tweet me. I look forward to hearing from many of you. And remember, you can now listen to Joe Lieberman on L'Chaim on our L'Chaim podcast. Go wherever you listen to podcasts, and you can find L'Chaim podcast there. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. L'Chaim, my friends, to life.
L'Chaim is a presentation of Jewish education in media.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more. Simply visit the JBS website at jbstv.org and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check to JBS, P.O. Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.